The wind rolled dry dirt across the road. One fence post leaned like it might fall. A single crow flew off into the bright, empty sky. A dusty pickup truck stopped near the gate. Sheriff Mullen stepped out. His boots hit the ground hard. His hand reached into his coat. Elias Granger stood by the barn, hammer still in hand. His brown dog Buck stayed close to his leg. Elias wiped his brow with his sleeve. Sheriff Mullen walked slowly. He looked around. The place looks rougher every time. Elias? Elias didn't answer. He stared straight. Sheriff Mullen pulled out a yellow paper. Eviction notice signed this morning. Sheriff Mullen slapped the notice onto the fence. It stuck there, fluttering in the hot wind. You've had your warnings, Sheriff Mullen said. The bank owns the land now. House, field, fences. Elias looked down once at Buck, then back to the sheriff. Not the barn. Sheriff Mullen paused. Barn's not on the main record, but don't get clever. You've got 14 days. Elias gave one short nod. Sheriff Mullen turned and walked back to the truck. Dust kicked up behind the tires. As he drove away, Elias watched until the truck vanished behind the hill. Elias, the rancher, had lived alone for 5 years. The land came from his father. The house had cracked, then faded. The tools rusted, the crops died, but Elias stayed. Buck followed close as Elias walked past the dead house. One shutter hung loose. The roof sagged. Elias didn't stop. He went to the barn. The door was crooked but opened with a push. Inside it smelled like dust, old straw and wood. Elias knelt near a corner. Buck circled once and laid down beside him. The beam above them had 3 letters carved deep. E.G. His father's mark. Elias brushed his hand across the letters. His fingers stopped on the edge. In a wooden crate nearby, he found an old blanket. He shook it out and spread it over some hay. He lit a rusted lantern. The flame caught slow but warm. Light filled the center of the barn. Elias took the yellow notice off the post. He folded it and slid it under a stone. Buck looked up. Elias whispered, "They forgot the barn, boy." Buck wagged his tail. The light flickered. The barn groaned once in the wind, but it stood. "You've got 14 days, Elias," the sheriff had said. After that, no land, no nothing. The sky stayed grey all morning. Wind pushed loose straw across the barn floor. A nail rolled off a beam and dropped with a soft clink. Elias Granger stood at the entrance, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand. Buck, the dog, sat near a pile of broken boards. The barn smelled like wet dirt and rust. Elias, the rancher, pulled down the first rotten plank. It snapped easy. Dust flew. He coughed and kept going. One by one, he cleared the left wall. Every nail he yanked went into a tin can. Every board he saved leaned against the back. Buck stayed still, eyes on Elias. The dog watched every move. Elias whispered, "Still with me, huh?" Buck wagged his tail once. "Good. We got work." Elias searched the crates for anything useful. He found an old saw with half its teeth gone, a jar of screws, a rusted box of nails. One short plank had a carved letter, G. Elias held it a moment, then tucked it under a crate. The sound of hammering filled the barn. Sharp, slow hits, wood against wood. The wall began to grow, one piece at a time. Elias remembered his father's voice. "Wood doesn't lie, boy, it just waits." He checked each board twice. No ruler, just his eye and his hand. The new frame leaned, but it stood. His hands bled where the splinters dug deep. The sun dipped below the field. Elias lit the lantern and tied a tarp over the missing roof boards. The night came fast. Buck circled and curled into the dry corner. Elias sat beside him, back against the new wall. Then came thunder. A deep, low crack rolled across the sky. The wind screamed through the gaps. Elias held the tarp rope tight, a sudden tear. Then water. The tarp snapped loose. Cold rain poured in, through the open roof. Buck barked and jumped to his feet. The hay turned dark with wet. The lantern hissed out. Elias didn't run. He stood in the rain, face up, breath slow. The rebuilt wall stayed up. The roof above it, however, gave in. A loud snap echoed as one of the old beams split. Water hit Elias square in the chest. He just stood there, soaked, mud up to his knees. Then Elias Granger laughed, just once, short, sharp, Guess we're not done yet, boy. He sat down hard, back against the wall again. Rain hit the dirt like nails on tin. Buck licked his hand. The night felt long and cold, but the wall stayed up. The dirt road into town was hot and cracked. One tire mark cut across it, dry and deep. A pair of crows flew overhead, wings silent. Elias Granger walked steady. His shirt stuck to his back. His boots were old, but solid. Buck, the dog, stayed close. The town sat ahead, small, quiet, watching, as Elias passed the school fence. Voices called out. "Hey, it's the barn man," one boy shouted. Another laughed. "Old Hay King and his mutt." 3 teenagers on bikes swerved past Elias. Dust flew up behind their wheels. One boy made a fake bow, then rode off laughing. Elias didn't speak. Buck growled once. Elias touched Buck's head. "Let it be." At the corner store, Elias opened the screen door. It creaked loud. The air inside was cool but sharp. Hank, the store clerk, stood behind the counter. Hank, the clerk, looked up, chewing something. Elias placed a small bag of screws and 2 boxes of nails on the wood. "I'll settle up next month," Elias said. Hank, the clerk, didn't move. "No more tabs. I've paid every time. That was before you slept in a barn." Buck sat beside Elias. The room felt smaller. "I'll bring money," Elias said. "No deal," Hank answered. "No money, no nails." Elias didn't argue. He turned, picked up the bag, and left the store. Back at the barn, Elias dropped the tools near the wall. The air was thick. He moved to an old chest in the corner. The chest belonged to Elias's. "Father?" The lid stuck but gave way. Inside, a coat, a tin box, and a faded scarf. In the coat pocket, Elias felt something hard, a silver coin. It was clean, smooth, heavy. On one side was a carved tree. On the other, a word, Granger. Elias, the rancher, sat still for a long time. The coin turned in his fingers. Buck walked over and rested his head on Elias's knee. "That coin's been in the family," Elias whispered. "My father carried it. Said it meant roots." He stood up. Back at the store, the bell above the door rang again. Hank, the clerk, didn't smile. Elias dropped the silver coin on the counter. "Will this do?" Hank picked it up, raised an eyebrow. "Old coin." "It's real. It'll buy a lot more than nails. I only need nails." Hank, the clerk, placed the coin in the drawer and slid the bag forward. Elias took it and walked out without a word. Back in the barn, Elias opened the nail bag and dumped it into the tin can. He set the silver coins bag on the crate beside the tools. He looked at Buck. "They'll remember that coin," Elias said, "but not for what it was." That night, Elias hammered in silence. Rain still came through the roof, but the new wall held. Buck slept against the beam with EG carved deep into the wood. That coin bought him nails, but cost him his pride. The morning sun cut through a gap in the barn wall. A beam of light landed on the dirt floor like a spotlight. Dust floated in the air. The hammering had stopped for now. Elias Granger sat cross-legged on the ground. A small piece of charcoal was in his hand. Buck, the dog, watched from a pile of hay. The barn smelled like wood dust, sweat, and something old. Elias, the rancher, dragged the charcoal in long lines across the dirt. His lines curved, split, overlapped. The drawing was rough but clear. "A loft here," Elias muttered. "Raised high, big enough to sleep in." He drew another box. "Feeding area for Buck. Water barrel in the corner." Elias scratched out a sidewall and added a ramp. "Ramp for you," Elias said, looking at Buck. "Your legs aren't what they used to be." Buck wagged his tail once. Elias gave a small nod. Elias stood, wiped his hands on his pants, and stepped back to look. The barn floor now held a plan, a home. Not just walls, but shape, levels, light. He pointed at the center. "Skylight right here. Sun can wake us up." He smiled, just a little. Elias moved toward the crates stacked near the back. He started clearing them, making space to measure the loft height. As he pulled a heavy crate aside, his boot pressed down on a plank. It gave a soft crack. Elias froze. He pressed again. The plank moved. He dropped to his knees and slid a rusted tool under the edge. The board came loose with a dry groan. Underneath was a small wooden box about the size of a lunch tin. Elias sat back on his heels. He opened the lid. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellow with age, one line written across the front. "To my son, Elias." Elias didn't speak. His hand shook just slightly as he opened the letter. The ink was faded but clear. "If you find this, it means you stayed. That means everything. This barn won't stand forever, but your name will. Make it yours. Dad." Elias stared at the words for a long time. He folded the letter once, gently, and placed it back in the box. Buck walked over and pressed his head against Elias's boot. Elias didn't cry. He didn't move much at all. He reached over, took a fresh piece of charcoal, and went back to the barn floor. He drew a square around the corner beam. Framed. "This stays. His words stay." Elias picked up the silver coin bag from the crate and placed it beside the box. 2 proof tokens now sat together. Coin and letter. "Roots," Elias said softly, "and reason." The light from the wall shifted. The beam moved across the floor, touching the new drawing. Outside, the wind slowed. Inside, the barn began to feel like something else. "If you find this, it means you stayed." That means everything. The frame stood strong. 4 new beams, 2 full walls. The barn no longer sagged like before. Warm light from oil lanterns hung from hooks along the rafters. For once, the corners weren't dark. Elias Granger stepped back and looked at his work. His hands were sore, his shirt soaked, but his eyes were calm. Buck lay near the crate, nose between paws, watching the flicker of flame. Elias, the rancher, pulled a roll of old insulation from a sack. He nailed thick layers between the back. Slats. Dust fell like snow. "Almost ready," Elias said. He glanced at the beam in the center. It still held the carved letters. E.G. His father's initials, his own. He had wiped it clean 2 days ago. The wood was old, but the carving ran deep. That night the wind outside was soft. Elias lit all 3 lanterns. The barn glowed amber. Buck circled twice before curling up near the dry straw pile. Elias took a bite of bread and leaned against. A post. His eyes closed just for a moment. Then, crash. 1 lantern hit the ground. Metal on dirt. A second of silence, then flame. The lantern burst. Oil spilled. Fire caught dry straw fast. Flames jumped like claws. "Buck!" Elias shouted. Buck barked, confused, already trying to escape the corner. Elias ran forward, pulling his coat over his mouth. Heat slapped him in the face. He grabbed. A crate threw it aside. Sparks flew. The fire climbed a side beam. Smoke filled the air. "Move!" Elias yelled again, coughing. Buck lunged through the smoke and dashed toward the open door. Elias turned back. The beam, the carved wood. Elias ran into the heat, eyes stinging. Flames touched the ceiling. The old blanket on the floor was gone, burned to ash. Elias grabbed the carved beam with both arms. It cracked, heavy. He pulled it loose, dragging it across the ground. Outside, Buck barked again. Inside, the roof groaned. Elias stumbled through. The smoke, the beam across his shoulder. He dropped to one knee outside the door. Buck jumped beside him. Behind them, fire lit up the barn window like a furnace. Orange and red danced across the night. From the hill above, a small figure watched. Then another. 2 men from the town stood beside their truck, just watching. Smoke rose high, but no one came. No one helped. The fire raged for another hour. Then silence. Elias sat on the cold dirt with Buck beside him. His arms burned. His shirt was black. In front of him, the carved beam rested on the ground. The letters still showed, E.G. He didn't scream. He didn't say a word. He just looked at what was left. The frame still stood, but everything inside was ash. The barn smelled like smoke and wet ash. One wall still stood, scorched black at the edge. Her tarp flapped loose in the breeze. The carved beam, marked with E.G., leaned against a crate like a grave marker. Elias Granger bent low, picking nails from the dirt. His fingers were blistered. Buck sat in the shade, ears down, eyes steady. A red truck pulled up fast. Dust rose behind it. The door creaked open. A man stepped out, tall and broad, wearing clean boots. He looked around like a customer inspecting. "Damage?" "That fire hit hard," the man said. Elias didn't answer. He stood, Slow. The man walked closer. "Name's Davis," the man said. "I build half the barns in this county." Elias stayed quiet. "I heard you're doing this alone," Davis said. "You need real hands," Buck growled, low and steady. Davis looked down, smirked. "Easy, Mutt, just being neighborly." Elias wiped his hands on his pants. "You came to offer or to watch?" Davis shrugged. "Offer, but I don't give my Saturdays for free unless it's worth my time." Elias stepped forward, standing between Davis and the barn. "I'm fine." "Suit yourself," Davis said. "But that fire told a story, and so does this mess." Davis turned and walked off. The red truck kicked dust as it rolled away. Elias watched until it vanished. He turned back to the beam, ran his hand across the EG. Buck licked his own paw, quiet. Again. Later that day, just before sunset, a smaller sound came from the path, a soft voice. "Hello?" Elias looked up. A young woman stood at the edge of the field. She held a basket with a cloth over the top. Elias wiped his face. "You lost?" "No," the girl said. "I'm Clara. I work at the library." Elias nodded once. "I brought bread," Clara said. "Still warm." Buck walked over first. Clara knelt, letting him sniff her hand. "Looks like he approves." Clara smiled. Elias stepped forward. He took the basket. "Thank you." Clara looked at the barn but didn't speak. She didn't ask questions. She didn't mention the fire. "I'll go now," she said. "I just thought maybe you'd want something made right." She turned and walked off, slow and light. Elias stood there for a minute, then opened the basket. Inside was fresh bread, a small cloth-wrapped jam, and something else tucked between the folds, a photo. Elias pulled it out carefully. It was old, faded. A school photo of a young girl with dark hair and sharp eyes. On the back, in pencil, Mary Granger, age 8, his mother. Elias's hands froze. He looked down at Buck. Buck looked up at him. "She knew," Elias whispered. "She knew who I am." He sat on the step and held the photo like it might break. The wind was quiet now. The girl in the picture had dark eyes, just like Clara. She had the same eyes as his mother. The sky turned dark before sundown. Black clouds rolled in like smoke. Trees bent eastward. The tarp on the barn roof flapped hard, barely hanging on. Elias Granger stood on a wooden ladder, hands cold, hammer swinging. Nails clanged into place. His shirt stuck to his back from sweat and rain. Buck the dog paced below. His ears twitched. He didn't bark, but he didn't sit still either. Elias, the rancher, kept going. "Just one more row," he muttered. Wind howled through the broken slats. Tools rattled on the floor. The lantern, tied to a beam, swayed back and forth. Elias hit another nail, missed, hit again. Lightning cracked. The sound tore through the sky. Thunder followed, deep and sharp. Buck barked. Elias looked down. Buck had slipped through the half shut. Barn door and was now outside, running toward the field. "Buck!" Elias shouted. Rain fell heavy and sudden. Elias jumped off the ladder, feet hitting hard. He slid in mud, caught his balance, and ran. "Buck, come here!" The wind shoved Elias sideways. Dirt and water hit his eyes. He spotted Buck, stuck under. A broken fence beam. Paw caught in wire. Elias rushed forward. "Easy, boy, easy." Elias dropped to his knees in the mud. His hands fumbled with the wire. Buck whimpered and kicked. "Hold still." Elias pulled the wire apart, cutting his hand. On the sharp end. Blood mixed with rain. Another flash. Thunder closer now. Elias scooped Buck into his arms. The dog was heavy, soaked through. He ran, legs sinking in the mud with every step. The barn door swung wide. Elias pushed through with his shoulder. He set. Buck down on dry ground. A loud crack came from above, the beam. The one with EG carved deep, it twisted. The fire damage had weakened it. The roof above the beam dropped 2 inches, then held. Elias looked up. Another gust hit. The tarp tore loose. Water crashed inside. The carved beam cracked once, loud. Elias threw his arms up and grabbed it, holding it in place. Wood splintered. The weight was massive. The roof groaned. Buck barked behind him. Elias pressed his shoulder into the beam, arms shaking. He shouted, not a word, just a sound. loud, sharp, raw. His boots slipped once. He pushed harder. Rain poured through the hole. Above him, soaking everything again. For 10 seconds nothing moved. Then the wind calmed, just a little. The roof shifted back. The pressure eased. Elias dropped to one knee, still holding the beam with one arm. He reached back with the other. Buck pressed into his side. The beam still cracked, but it held. Elias stayed there, soaked, muddy, breathing hard. He looked down at Buck. "We're still here." The rain slowed. The wind outside still howled, but not as strong. Inside the barn, Elias held the beam with one arm, Buck with the other, and refused to let go. The storm passed before dawn. Grey clouds drifted slow across the pale sky. The barn stood, wet and crooked, but standing. One corner of the roof sagged where the tarp had torn. The carved beam with EG held, though a deep split ran down its center. Elias Granger sat on a crate, hand wrapped in a torn cloth. His fingers were swollen. A line of dried blood ran across his knuckles. Buck lay near the door, eyes half shut, tail twitching now and then. Water still dripped from the roof. Elias, the rancher, leaned forward and ran his free hand across the beam. The wood was damp and rough. "You didn't break," Elias whispered. "Not all the way." A soft knock came from outside. Buck lifted his head. Elias stood slowly. His legs ached. He opened the door. Clara stood there, holding a basket and a small tin box. "I saw the storm," Clara said. "Thought you could use this." Elias stepped aside. "Come in." Clara walked inside, eyes moving across the walls, the broken roof, the scattered tools. She didn't comment. She placed the basket down on the crate beside him. "I brought food. And this." She held up the tin. "First aid." Elias unwrapped the cloth from his hand. The cut was deep, lined with splinters. "Let me," Clara said. Elias hesitated, then nodded. Clara knelt beside him and cleaned the wound. Her touch was careful but firm. She pulled a needle from the kit. "This might hurt." "I've felt worse," Elias said. "You didn't scream." Elias smirked. "I did. Once." Clara smiled but said nothing. She stitched the cut, slow and neat, then wrapped it clean. When she finished, she sat beside him, quiet for a long moment. "I knew your mother," Clara said. Elias looked at her. "My mom and Mary Granger were best friends. They grew up together. She used to talk about your mother all the time." Elias didn't speak. "When I saw your name on the land records, I knew it had to be you. That's why I brought the photo. That's why I came." Elias nodded once. "I didn't know anyone remembered her. She was smart," Clara said, "sharp as a nail and kind. People forget the kind ones first." Buck walked over and rested his head on Clara's knee. Elias looked around the barn. Wet wood, burned crates. A roof that barely held, but someone had come, someone stayed. "You don't owe the town anything, Elias," Clara said, "but you might owe yourself a life." She stood and grabbed the empty basket. Elias reached out and touched the beam again. The carved letters were still there, deep in the split. The barn had bent, but it hadn't fallen. The sound of hammering had not stopped for days. Metal struck wood from dawn to dusk. The echo traveled down the road, through the fields and into the town. People noticed. By the 5th day, a group started walking up the dirt path. First a boy on a bike, then 2 shopkeepers, then a truck parked and 5 more stepped out. They came without asking. The barn stood tall now. The roof was sealed. The tarp was gone. Fresh boards lined the front, nailed clean. A small lantern hung above the doorway. Inside, Elias Granger checked the final hinge. Buck sat near the wall, calm and quiet. Clara stood by the side table, wiping. Dust from the photo frame. Elias the rancher wiped sweat from his brow. His shirt was stained, but his back was straight. More footsteps approached. From the field, Elias saw Davis near the back of the crowd. Davis crossed his arms. He didn't speak. Elias didn't greet them. He didn't wave. He walked to the double barn doors. He pulled them open, slow and wide. Light spilled in. The town stared. The inside of the barn glowed. Golden light bounced off smooth wood. A custom loft stretched across the back wall, clean and raised with thick beams. A narrow ramp curled up to one side, built low for Buck. The skylight above poured in sunlight. Dust floated like glitter. On the right wall, a photo sat in a hand-carved frame, Mary Granger, age 8. Below it, the silver coin rested in a glass box. The letter from his father hung next to it. The words were clear. If you find this, it means you stayed. That means everything. Below that, Buck's sleeping mat was tucked under a shelf. A wooden bowl and water tin sat beside it. Elias said nothing. He stepped back and stood next to Clara. Someone near the front whispered, "He built all this?" Another voice replied, "By hand. Alone." Even Davis stepped forward. His eyes scanned. The skylight, the ramp, the way the beams lined up without a gap. Davis opened his mouth, then shut it again. No one clapped. No one joked. They just stared. Elias didn't smile. He didn't bow. He stood still, arms at his sides. Clara looked at him and said softly, "You gave them nothing to mock." A breeze moved through the barn. It smelled like sawdust and pine. Boy near the back asked, "Is this still a barn?" Someone else answered, "No, it's his home." Elias stepped forward once and placed his hand on the beam with EG carved deep. The crack still ran through the center, but it was sealed with a steel bracket now, shiny and solid. He looked back at the crowd. No one moved. Even Davis stayed silent. The town went quiet, for once, out of respect. The morning light slid through, the skylight in soft lines. Dust floated slow, caught in gold. The barn was quiet now, no hammering, no voices, just stillness. Elias Granger walked the center aisle, slow and steady. Buck padded beside him, tail low, head calm. The floorboards creaked in familiar rhythm. Elias the rancher let his hand graze the carved beam as he passed. The split was sealed, but the initials still showed, EG. The wood felt solid beneath his fingers. He stopped at the wall where the letter hung. His eyes scanned the words again, though he had them memorized. If you find this, it means you stayed. That means everything. Next to the letter, the school photo smiled back at him, Mary Granger, age 8. The coin in its glass box reflected the sunlight like a soft mirror. Behind him, Clara stepped into the doorway. She didn't speak. Elias turned to her and held out the coin, not in its box but in his hand. "Might need it more than me," Elias said. Clara looked at him, surprised. "It's yours." Elias shook his head. "It was my father's. Then mine. Now someone else should carry it." Clara reached forward and took the coin. Her fingers closed around it carefully, like it could shatter. "Thank you," Clara said. Elias nodded once. They stood there, neither needing more words. Elias turned back and walked toward the ramp. Buck followed. The ramp creaked gently as the dog made his way up, one step at a time. At the top, the loft opened wide. A bedroll, a shelf, a window that looked out to the east. Elias sat down at the edge and looked across the barn. Every board meant something now. Every nail had a story. "This place won't last forever," Elias said. "But names do," Clara sat on the bottom step. She looked up at him, holding the coin in her hand. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Elias stood again and walked back down. Buck didn't follow this time. The old dog circled once on the upper floor, then laid down right beneath the carved beam. Elias looked up at him and gave one soft whistle. Buck didn't move, but his tail wagged, once, slow. Elias stepped outside, into the morning sun. The wind blew light through the grass. He paused at the fence, hand resting on the post where the eviction notice once hung. No one waited on the road, no trucks, no noise, just peace. Elias looked back at the barn. From where he stood, it looked like it belonged there. Not a ruin, not a project, a name built into wood and time. A voice carried in the wind now. It wasn't loud, just a whisper. "Elias, Elias, Elias."